I am currently living in what I call the long Saturday of uncertainty. As many of you know, back in December, I received an injection in my upper arm, which may or may not have been a vaccination against COVID-19. It also may or may not have been a saline solution placebo. At that time, I did not know, and neither did the researchers who injected me and 40,000 other people around the world as part of Johnson & Johnson's Phase 3 vaccine trial. And you know what? I was okay with that. I signed up to be part of a double-blind clinical study. I knew that ahead of time, and I didn't volunteer for this just to get a vaccine, but to do my part, whatever that meant, in the fight against COVID. And under normal circumstances, participants aren't even unblinded until the end of the 2-year study. But these are not normal circumstances. And we were informed that if and when the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was approved by the FDA for emergency use authorization, that participants would then be called in to be unblinded, and those that received the placebo would receive their vaccine right then and there. And as you know, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was approved on February 27th. And it's nice because it's only one shot instead of the two. It doesn't have to be deep frozen. They're cheaper and easier to manufacture, so they've been able to crank them out and increase that vaccine supply. And some of you have received it yourselves. But as for me, I still don't know. And many of you have asked me, and I appreciate you asking me, but I still don't know. I am still waiting for them to call me. And that's okay, really. I'm okay with it. I'm not mad. The vaccine clinic has emailed me a few times with updates, and they are working on unblinding people, but I believe the situation is they're prioritizing participants age 50 and up who are currently eligible to receive a vaccine. And for me and many other adults in Michigan, that's not until tomorrow. Tomorrow. So I understand. They are working as fast as they can while also continuing their critical research. But until I get that phone call, I don't know whether I'm vaccinated or not. And I have been living my life since December with the assumption that I am not. And I would love to learn that actually I've been vaccinated all year. But I won't assume that is the case in case I wasn't. And I will confess to you, waiting in that uncertainty can be really hard, especially when the stakes are this high. I mean, there are stories of participants in the placebo groups that have sadly died of COVID. And that's why they're unblinding everyone now, to ensure that everyone has that vaccine. And waiting is hard. But I'm holding on to hope. And that makes all the difference. Because it is Saturday. But Sunday's coming. And yet Saturday can seem like such a long, long time. I'm referring to a week that happened long time ago. Nearly 2,000 years later, we are still talking about it a lot. Many Christians call it Holy Week and recognize days like Palm Sunday last week, when Jesus rode into Jerusalem with great fanfare and celebration. And afterwards, he spent a busy few days in that city, both publicly in the temple courts and privately with his disciples and by himself. On Maundy Thursday, Jesus washed his disciples' feet and demonstrated the love of a servant. And that funny word, Maundy, comes to us in English from the Latin mandatum, meaning commandment. And it refers to what Jesus told his disciples in that upper room. A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And Thursday was also the day of the Last Supper, his final Passover meal with those close to him. But then there's Good Friday, which also has an unusual name, because how could you call it good? It was the day that Jesus was betrayed by Judas and arrested while praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was taken before the Sanhedrin and found guilty by the Jewish court. And then he stood before Pilate and Herod, the Roman authorities, who condemned him to death. And that same crowd that welcomed him into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday called for his crucifixion just a few days later. And by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jesus died on a cross on that Good Friday. And ever since, we've been wondering, what is so good about it? Well, in English, the original meaning of the word good also implied holy or pious. And other languages have different names for it. In Latin, it's referred to as the Friday of the Passion. But as strange as that name is, and as strange as Maundy Thursday is, Easter is an even stranger name in English, because it comes from the name of a Germanic pagan goddess of spring named Joster. Now most other languages call the day Pascha, which is coming from the word Passover. And personally, my preference is to call today Resurrection Sunday, because that is what we're celebrating today. Good Friday wasn't that great. But Resurrection Sunday turned it all around when that tomb was found empty and the gospel was first proclaimed that Christ is risen from the dead, and that is why we are here today. But in all of this, do you know what doesn't get a lot of attention? Saturday. It doesn't have a cool or weird name. It's just Holy Saturday. It is the day that Jesus laid in the tomb. It is the day when, for the disciples, nothing happened. It was the day between Friday and Sunday, between the cross and the empty tomb. It was the long Saturday of uncertainty, when the stakes were higher than ever, a day filled with a feeling that is all too familiar to us. Because everyone on earth right now knows what it's like to wait patiently with bated breath. Just a couple hours ago, I was talking to my friend Brian, and he said, I'm having trouble celebrating Easter today, because I feel like my life is in a Holy Saturday right now, you know? It's weird. I'm thrilled that he has risen, but there's also a sense of not yet. Brian isn't alone in feeling this. None of us are alone. We are not alone. You know, we've spent much of the last year at our church talking about the struggle being caught in the middle between the beginning and the end. God's people have always wrestled with this, and the Bible documents it well, as we've seen in Deuteronomy this summer and Revelation this winter. But none of the 4 gospel accounts say much at all about that Saturday. The only scriptural reference to that day is about the Pharisees going to Pilate, asking for a guard to stand at Jesus' tomb in case the disciples tried to steal the body. But for the disciples, there's nothing to be said. We don't read anything about the disciples themselves, how they were feeling, what they were doing, or anything at all. But maybe it's because we don't really need to be told. We know. Saturday is the longest day After a tragedy, the hardest day is the day after. Because it's the day when you have to wake up to a world that has changed, and it isn't the same for you anymore. But then you have to somehow make it to the end of the day. Somehow. You've got to keep busy and do what you need to do, because somehow that helps to keep your mind off of what happened. But for the disciples, it wasn't just Saturday. It was the Sabbath. It was the day of rest. There wasn't any work to be done. There were no distractions. Just waiting and wondering in the silence and stillness of Saturday. Around this time, 11 years ago now, a tragedy happened to me. I lost my job after an unjust situation, which I've shared with you before. I couldn't even tell my wife until the day after. And I felt bad that I didn't, but I didn't know how. I called her first thing in the morning. Not that I slept much that night. And I spent that entire day talking with family and friends, trying to process everything that had happened, but also trying to figure out where to go from there. Blythe and I were getting married just a couple of weeks later. But our plans after that collapsed like a house of cards. And for us then, it was a long Saturday of uncertainty. Months of job searching passed. And then finally, a year. Hopes came and went and returned again. But eventually, Sunday did come. When we're struggling like this, we wish that we could go from Friday right to Sunday. But Saturday has its place. Jesus didn't need to stay in that tomb all day. He could have resurrected right away. He could have been up and about by Friday at 3:30. But I believe that the way that it happened, it did that because the disciples needed Saturday. And it wasn't to tease or to taunt them or to string them along, but to transform them. Because on Saturday, not only is our world completely changed, but we change too. We have to sit in our sorrow for a while and grieve and mourn, because God does not simply replace or take away our sorrow, but God transforms our sorrow into joy. God doesn't take away or replace our sorrow, but God transforms and changes and turns our sorrow into joy. Do we believe this? Well, if we do, then we may find hope. And hope gets us through the quiet darkness of Saturday night and wakes us up on Sunday morning to a stone rolled away and an empty tomb. Hope is the persistent belief that despite how uncertain that long Saturday is, Sunday is coming. And the glorious news that death has made way for resurrection. Now, this doesn't necessarily make the waiting easier. It doesn't make the day go by faster, but it gives the waiting meaning. Saturday may go by slowly, but it is not pointless. For our sorrow is being turned to joy. This is our hope. Last Easter Sunday was hard. I was sitting at my office desk, preaching to the webcam on my office computer, like I had done for a few weeks at that point. I had been planning our Easter service for a couple of months at that point, but I had to change everything once mid-March hit us. And I was sad, and I was disappointed, and I knew many of you were too. And yet, we found a way to rejoice last year. And even if we had been told back then that a year later things would be a little different and a little better, but that we still wouldn't be back to normal, we would have found a way to rejoice. Because we knew then what we still know now, that Sunday is coming. Our vaccination effort is already underway. Even though we're nowhere close to herd immunity yet, we now have hope for that day, whenever it might be. It started with this woman right here, Margaret Keenan, the first person in the world to receive a COVID vaccine outside of clinical trials. On December 8th, 2020, the 91-year-old British grandmother received that first jab of the vaccine that several of you have received now as well. And maybe soon I will learn that I received mine in December too, or that I didn't, and will be vaccinated soon. But I have hope in the confidence that one way or another, it will happen soon. And because of this, I am at peace. But the greater peace that I have is that even if I don't, and even if the worst happens to me, or if the many other even ifs out there come to be, because on that Sunday the tomb was found empty, mine will be too. And so will yours. We will rise. I grieve for the brothers and sisters that we have lost. Some who are not here with us today, which is too many. But one day, they will rise. And through this long Saturday of uncertainty that we are living in, our sorrow is being transformed into joy, for we have the hope that we will see them again. That final Sunday is coming, and the sun will rise with it. Because not only is this pandemic going to end, but because of the resurrection, we have the blessed hope for things to come, not just in this life, but in the life to come. In 1 Corinthians 15, the Apostle Paul called Jesus' resurrection the first fruits of our own resurrections. In other words, Jesus was the Margaret Keenan, the first part of something greater and fuller to come, when all of us are raised from the dead and death is defeated once and for all. And we are holding out in hope for that blessed day. O risen Lord, come quickly. I said the following words at the end of my sermon last Easter, and I will say them again today. How are we going to get through this pandemic? The same way that we get through this present life and all other things that come our way, with the blessed knowledge that the tomb is empty and death has been defeated and Christ is victorious over sin, and that no matter what happens, that gospel truth remains. And it is a simple truth, but it is a glorious one. Do you believe it? If you do, cling to it tightly. Because maybe you aren't sure. Cling to it anyway. Sometimes belief comes later, but don't go without it. Because this world is too hard without the resurrection. We are holding on to hope. And that hope makes all the difference. It is Resurrection Sunday, church. Let us rejoice together. And let us worship Christ, the conqueror of death. Amen.